Greetings, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 30th of August, 2024, and we are coming to you with another live stream this evening, focused principally but not exclusively on the Ukraine war. And in many ways, it is a follow-up from yesterday's program, where we looked at the ever perfidious role of a certain Sir Keir Starmer, and looked at what he might be up to in terms of his various different plots within Europe. And so I'm going to be following up on that today and looking at the latest scandals, shall we say, coming from Ukraine, and how this all signals a slow but inexorable American retreat from the Ukraine theatre of war, and how the British and the Europeans are responding to this. So, to look at the case of the shot down F16 first, this was reported on by even people within the Ukrainian government structure, and this was reported on by the United States, U.S. media. The bourgeois press in the United States reported this, that the first F-16 in Ukraine had gone down, and it had actually been shot down, according to the Ukrainian sources, by a Patriot air defense battery. So, if the Ukrainian story is correct, the Ukrainians shot down one of their own planes, which doesn't exactly make anybody look good. But this was always, of course, something that was a wildly overhyped delivery of a new weapon system in the form of the F-16. This was the demand of every NAFO troll, and the likes of Paul Mason, who would just tweet out over and over again F-16s, F-16s, F-16s in some sort of mad stream of consciousness, because they apparently believed that the introduction of F-16s into the Ukrainian theatre of war would make all the difference. And even if we didn't have this one that was apparently shot down by the Ukrainians themselves by accident, presumably because they weren't, they assumed that any plane in the sky must be a Russian one. But even if we didn't have that, and even if it was just the case that they were introducing F-16s and they hadn't had the embarrassment of apparently shooting one down themselves, it was always a very dubious case at best that was being made here by the advocates of providing the F-16s to Ukraine, that somehow providing aircraft from the United States and from European countries, that these aircraft were manufactured in the United States, though. So by providing US aircraft that are around about 50 years old, albeit with a lot of updates, that this was going to be somehow the game changer. And if you recall, there's been various game changers announced in the Ukraine war that have turned out to be nothing of the case, nothing of the sort. All the way back in mid-2022, we had the introduction of the HIMARS system, the multiple launch rocket system designed and built by the Americans. And that was going to be the game changer. And that had some big hits for a while. And then the Russians adapted to it and started to be able to intercept them with their air defense capability. And they also got hold of several unexploded HIMARS missiles and were able to unravel whatever secrets lay within. And so the effectiveness of HIMARS, whereas it's still capable of doing damage, has been dramatically downscaled since it was first introduced. So the first wonder weapon, the first game changer, wasn't a game changer. Then we get all the arguments about the provision of tanks, like the provision of the Leopard 2 tank, the provision of the Abrams tank, the supply of the Challenger 2 tank by the British. All of this was like the big story all the way through 2023. They were going to be bringing in Abrams tanks, they're bringing in Challenger 2 tanks. The Leopard tank was being introduced. This was going to be all the memes you saw from all the professional paid idiots online, were all about how this was going to be, again, the game changer. And they threw a lot of these things into the June 2023 assault down in the Zaporozhye region, and it turned into a disaster. They lost a hell of a lot of armor. A lot of the Leopard 2 tanks got blown up. And the Challenger 2 tank, whenever it has ventured out, and the British only provided, I believe it was 13 of them. Now, bear in mind, the British only have around about 32 that are operational inside their own armed forces. So this is a not exactly something which is in has a very high stockpile that they can draw on. But the Russians have found out how to blow it up. The amazing formula for its armoured plating was apparently unbreakable. The Russians broke it pretty easily. The Leopard 2 turned out to fare not much better than its tank ancestors in World War II, which is something that is apparently very expensive, very flashy design, and was unable to change the course of the war, which it was never going to. And yet they keep, the propaganda agents in Zelensky's office and in the West keep on pushing this story through the bourgeois press that the next weapon system will be the game changer. And F-16s were the next game changer. And it was never going to be the case that any of these were. Now, here we, of course, have to separate out propaganda and reality, illusions and reality. The illusion that all of these professional propagandists want to propagate, so to speak, is that if they just introduced one big new weapon system, then it would surely cause the Russians to panic and run away, because they couldn't possibly fight this amazing weapon that had been designed in the imperial core countries. Again, was never going to be correct, was never going to be right, was always likely to fall apart upon contact with reality. And this is indeed exactly what has happened. And it shows a deliberate ignorance that the propagandists of the West have, again, sought to draw on, of the way in which war actually works. Now, I'm not an expert on this by any means. As I've said before, my experience of weaponry stops with the Boy Scout shooting badge that I got at age 13. But just from an examination of how this is how war is actually managed, like the idea that you throw in like the Leopard 2 tank, for instance, and it becomes a game changer on its own, is something which is a ludicrous suggestion, because you're talking about taking a tank out of the system in which it is meant to be deployed and sticking it in the Ukrainian army, and then somehow it's going to perform at optimal level. Because as has been shown through this war, which is a large conventional war, it's the kind of which has not really been fought in Europe since World War II. I know we had the Yugoslav wars, but they were on a much smaller scale than this. But as we've seen from the Russian special military operation, the age of the tank isn't over. They're still effective weapons, but only if they're built into a system of support. And by the way, you can also draw from the examples of the Israeli army in Gaza, where the Palestinian resistance fighters have been jumping out, blowing holes in the Merkava tanks and jumping back into the tunnels again and retreating with a high degree of success. And that's partially because the Israelis have made a similar mistake to the Ukrainians, which is that they aren't integrating the tank into a system which makes proper usage of it. They are apparently not, the Israelis aren't screening their tanks with infantry formations, and they aren't able to provide requisite air cover in these densely built up areas. So the tank's getting hit by RPGs and homemade bombs on a regular basis because, again, it's not adequately protected. If you look at the way the Russians use their tanks, it seems that they deploy them with as part of as part of a formation that has infantry protection, that has air support, which has air defense around it, so that the tank can operate without getting instantly blown up by the other side using anti-tank drones, anti-tank missiles, or something like that. So the idea that you suddenly take the Leopard 2, the Challenger 2, the Abrams out of the operating system that it's in. So the operating system in the case of the Abrams being the US Army, or I don't believe, I'm right in saying I think the US Marine Corps uses the Abrams as well, in which it is integrated into a system to both protect it and enable it to make maximum usage of its firepower. You take that out and put it in a whole new context where it doesn't have air support, that it doesn't have the right amount of backup in terms of air defense as well to defend against Russian aircraft. Ukraine is chronically short of air defense due to the fact that the Russians waged a very effective campaign in wiping it out, and the West hasn't been able to supply the requisite amount to make up for the difference. Then the tank doesn't perform as well. Now that should be self-explanatory to anybody who again is able to just do basic analysis of like, well, what is tank warfare like? I mean, tanks weren't even immune or had to be supported properly. As soon as they were introduced in World War One, they had to be integrated into a system that would support them and enable them to make proper usage of their firepower. Again, this isn't able to be done with the Ukrainian army because they don't have the air support system. Same with the F16. Like you introduce like what, 15 to 20, possibly 30, depending upon which numbers you believe, F16 fighters, not supported properly, with pilots that are barely trained on them and don't have a lot of experience. Again, without the necessary air defense to back them up against the Russian aircraft. And you think that that's going to be the game changer? Of course it's not. Of course, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So the only reason that this is focused on, as a so-called game changer, is because this is a game changer only in PR terms. In PR terms, like you can present the entry of HIMARS, Leopard 2s, Challenger 2s, Abrams tanks, or the F-16, and say that that's a game changer. Oh my God, the Russians have never faced anything like this before. They're surely going to crumble and run away now. You can put that in a PR package or a briefing that you give to some slack-jawed, drooling moron of a politician in Westminster or Washington or Paris, but they have a vested interest in believing the lies. Anybody with half a brain who looks at this would see that this makes no sense other than as a PR win. So it's a PR win for Zelensky in that he can present himself as the only man who can secure the adequate levels of support from the imperialist powers for his failing and flailing regime. And they can portray it as a PR win because this is the entry onto the battlefield of the unrivaled weaponry of the Western alliance. And of course, the Russians have, again, like they did with the HIMARS, learning its weaknesses and blowing it up on a fairly regular basis. So again, this is war by PR machine. And even if they provided 100 F-16s, the Russians would shoot them all down. They would blow up the airfields where they were kept. They would blow up the area, the bases in Ukraine that are meant to repair them. And this is the nonsense of this PR war that they are fighting, which again, to go back to our previous episodes on the Kursk incursion, that's what that's all about. That's not about actual being in with a chance of scoring some great victory. In fact, the military, if you believe the reports from the Ukrainian Telegram channels that do a lot of leaking, mainly Legitimny has reported on this. This was a political decision designed in the office of the president, the Kursk incursion. The office of the president has decided that they need a win. They can't get one in Donbass, so let's go elsewhere for it. Let's invade. Let's go launch an invasion into this corner of Russia. Again, hasn't worked. They haven't achieved what they apparently wanted to achieve, which is to seize the Kursk regional nuclear power facility. And now their troops are getting annihilated. So again, hasn't worked. Was a PR move designed apparently either by Zelensky himself or more likely Andrei Yermak, who's like the power behind the throne in Ukraine, in close alliance, of course, with the largely British and maybe American military officers who are doing the actual planning, but it seems to be that this is largely a British affair. So again, war by PR, designed only to justify one thing, which is more war, which is to keep the war going. And here we will get back to our theme of last night, which is the machinations of a certain Sir Keir Starmer, though really he is merely a puppet in the hands of the British ruling class and their state machine. The British clearly are becoming wary of the way that things are drifting in the United States. They can see that Harris, not through any attack of principle or anything, is accepting advice that this war is not going well. There's not going to be a victory, which is why they're generally they're making a big thing about the Biden administration's record in defense, but I doubt they'll be running on the great successes of the Ukraine war. I doubt they'll be mentioning it too much. As I've said before, their plan is just to spin this war out as long as they possibly can, and if that means that the entirety of Ukraine gets destroyed, then that's fine by them. So the way in which the British are viewing things is that they are looking to snare the Europeans into continuing the financial support for Ukraine as long as is possible. And this is the big scheme that I think, one of the big schemes that Starmer is working on. Remember that he has said over and over again that the Britain stands with Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine no matter what. We will be there to the bitter end. Which means that we'll be shoving you into a Russian bayonet until the bitter end, really. But they can't do that on their own. If the United States government decides that, well, this is a bit of a loser, it's a bit of a losing proposition, let's just slowly back away from this inch by inch and refocus on Asia Pacific. I think there was a last-ditch attempt by Jake Sullivan, the current president's national security advisor and ginger genius, to go over to Beijing this week and tell the Chinese that they needed to stop backing those damn Russians or else. And the Chinese basically said, gave them the middle. If the middle finger gesture exists in Chinese culture or something similar to that, because why on earth would the Chinese do the US imperialists a favor when they know full well now that even if they were inclined to do so, the US imperialists are coming for them in the form, or coming to Taiwan to try and stage something there, try and trigger something there, in order that they can justify waging some kind of war, maybe by proxy, against the Chinese. So the Chinese know that the US imperialists are being compelled by the contradictions and the crisis of their own system into a war with them. Now, the Chinese are very interesting in the way that they express things in terms of their foreign policy and their analysis, in that the government, unlike in the revolutionary period, doesn't use the word imperialism very much. But if you read their analysis, they say everything but that. So they don't use that word anymore, though they have been evolving their pronouncements on the US rapidly over the last few years. I think especially since the Hong Kong events. I think that was probably a moment when any pro-US comprador faction inside China got terminally weakened, because it was so obvious that the events in Hong Kong were a cook-up job done by networks controlled by the United States and Britain, that any pro-American faction in Beijing that did exist has long since bitten the dust. That, and apparently, again, the Chinese initially viewed COVID as a bioweapon unleashed on them by the United States. Again, we will have to see how true that is. I'm certainly going to try and do more research on that. But why on earth would the Chinese do the US a favor when, if the US gets its way in this war against the Russians, that's if the US was to prevail in this war against the Russians using the Ukrainian proxies, why on earth would the US just stop there? They would immediately come for the Chinese, and from a position of more strength. So it is in China's interests on many levels to continue their relationship with the Russians. They know that they understand now. I think the revolutionaries in the Chinese party always have understood that the US will have no choice but to try and destroy the People's Republic of China in the end, even with all the temporary deals that they've done with them. The way in which this will shake out is, of course, that the Chinese will say, "That's very interesting, Mr. Sullivan. Please go away now," or some words to that effect, because they every time they think they've made some progress with the United States, the United States turns around and basically fucks them over. So this is this represents a shift in the Chinese calculations, which has been forced on them by the fact they've been compelled to realize that there is no agreement that the US imperialists will sign that they will stick to. The crisis in the US system is too great for them to be sticking by agreements. They have to strive for the destruction of both Russia and China, and therefore it makes some kind of war being staged over Taiwan a near inevitability, unless, of course, the balance of forces inside the United States itself changes fundamentally, and that can only change by a rising up of the US proletariat against the imperialist system. And I don't rule that out. Certainly there are a good many sincere communists in the United States who want to work towards that, many becoming members of the ACP, but I think we're a ways away from that for now. To return to the question at hand, though, the fate of Ukraine is being decided, of course, far away from Ukraine. The fate of Ukraine is being decided in principally Washington, D.C., even if the British plot to ensnare the Europeans, or get the Europeans to ensnare themselves in continued backing for the war, trying to continue the war, even if the US downgrades its own involvement in it. That won't work. The Europeans might be able to keep Ukraine afloat for a little while longer, but not for much longer. And again, the Russians still aren't using the maximum amount of force that they could, but they are effectively doing what President Putin said they would do, which is demilitarizing Ukraine. They're deindustrializing Ukraine. They are destroying Ukraine's fighting capacity in terms of killing gigantic numbers of Ukrainian men who have been mobilized by the NATO-backed regime there. So eventually this whole thing is going to collapse. And I think that, again, I'll make the comment I've made before here, which is that the British especially are, well, they're not happy with a collapse, but they are prepared to sit and wait for and try and compel the Ukrainians to continue to fight to the point where the Russians have to march all the way up to Kiev and beyond. And then if that happens, then the British will dust their hands off and say, well, we cost the Russians billions upon billions and thousands of lives, and we'll never acknowledge their control over Ukraine. We'll never acknowledge any government that comes into power in Kiev that is aligned with Russia, and we'll continue to run our terrorist operations there. This is the plan of the British if it all goes wrong. The British fallback plan is to run an unlimited terrorist campaign inside any area of Ukraine that is either under Russian control or under the control of a government that is friendly to Russia. So the plan has evolved, but it has not fundamentally changed. I don't think anybody inside the the more serious circles in London or Washington believes this thing can be won anymore. But they are only seeking to endlessly prolong it with new wonder weapons, with new PR initiatives that cost gigantic amounts of Ukrainian lives, with new bullshit, with new maneuvers, with new the adoption and move to sort of pseudo-terrorist tactics. This is the way the war is going. And ultimately it will fail, it will fall to pieces, but not before many thousands more Ukrainians have died needlessly. They have died in support of the share prices of corporations in London and Washington and Paris and Berlin and Amsterdam and Brussels. They've died for the profits of BlackRock. They've died for the profits of Rheinmetall and BAE Systems. They've died for the right, so-called, of the owners of Ukrainian land to continue to profit off of it. This is what Ukrainians, after 30 years of so-called independence, are being asked to fight and die for. And after 30 years of so-called independence, this is the final condemnation of the comprador regimes that have run Ukraine since 1991, which is that they took one of the most industrialized parts of the former USSR, one of the most scientifically advanced. They asset stripped it, looted it, turned it into a semi-colony of the United States, and allowed it to be mobilized against Russia to the point where what was left of industry was destroyed and what was left of the population was herded into an early grave, shoved into an early grave. And that's what 30 years of rule by Kravchuk, Yanukovych, Leonid Kuchma, Yushchenko, Poroshenko, and Zelensky has achieved. That's what independence has done. It's not that much different to what it's done in the Baltic states, which is where they went from being quite well industrialized parts of the former USSR into asset stripped, financialized hellholes with literally a population that's dying off. 30 years of independence doesn't look very much like independence to me. Right, okay, so moving to the comments. Paul Mason joins us and says, "Greetings, I'm looking forward to this episode. Update as I'm still not leading an international battalion in the Kursk salient." Paul, I mean, I've said it before, go over there. You know, come on the show live from Kursk. Tell us what's going on. Lead this anti-fascist battalion of yours, maybe with Bono, maybe with Owen Jones, maybe with Billy Bragg. You can take him as well. Everybody will love it. Comradely greetings to Svetlana in Moscow, who says, "And the latest piece of news from inside Ukraine is that priests and monks are to be mobilized and sent to the front or to be sent to prison. I wonder if CNN will tell American Christians that." They probably won't, Svetlana, or if they will, they'll dress it up. They'll be like some ultra-nationalist Ukrainian priest, some fascist guy who's in like the Ukrainian version of the Orthodox Church, will be there, you know, blessing a drone and saying, "I am very happy to be here fighting for freedom. God says Moscow will lose," that kind of thing. This is what they will do. And to be quite frank, this line that some people use, that you've used here about American Christians, look, and I'm by no means tarring all American Christians with the same brush here. Many will be, some American Christians will be anti-imperialists, some will care about these things. But again, like the principal form of Christianity in the United States that is promoted by the US bourgeoisie themselves is of different variants, not of Christian scripture, but of a sort of cult-like American nationalism with Christian stylings, or American bourgeois nationalism, I should say, with Christian stylings. Like it is the American imperialism. It is the American imperial cult, basically. American Christianity, or I should say, American bourgeois Christianity. Its God is not even the dollar. It's God is like the American empire, American imperialism. That's their God. Nothing to do with if you believe in the Almighty or not. I remember a lot of fuss being kicked up, rightly so, about like the fact that American Christian politicians were siding with jihadists in Syria. And of course, these great men of faith didn't give two shits about that, just as they don't give two shits about Christians in Palestine. Because again, their God is not any God that is found in the Bible. It is the God of empire. It's the God of American imperial power, and his holy angels are, well, the different branches of the U.S. military and secret services. This is what happens to religions when they are parts of imperialism, when they are incorporated into the imperial cult. They become these bizarre, probably profoundly bastardized versions of Christianity. Profoundly, I would say, if not sinful, then certainly reprehensible versions of Christianity that have nothing to do with any positive aspects of the faith whatsoever. The same was true, by the way, for British Christianity. Like you look at the doctrines of the official British Church, and it was like it was basically a core part of the imperial cult back in in the days when Britain's empire was actually based on land and sea rather than in finance. And the same is true for all of the Christian the Christian churches of the imperialist countries. All of them got wrapped up with imperialism, and all of them became profoundly bastardized as a result, and have much more to do with contorted versions of sort of American or British or French Christian bourgeois nationalism than anything else. You can see the way that this plays out in the United States with the various different and aggressive forms of Christian nationalism or Christian bourgeois nationalism and their rabid support for Zionism, which is just a sort of a more overtly religious in a Christian sense form of imperialism. It's just imperialism, but dressed as a preacher proclaiming we've got to get all the Jews back to the Holy Land. Again, like there's British Christian Zionism, which emerged much earlier for similar reasons, for reasons of state, for reasons of imperial conquest. So this is the way that religion is used by imperialism. It contorts it, distorts it, turns it into a sort of a nightmarish hall of mirrors version of it. And again, it's why religion in the form of Christianity in the West is in crisis, and the only way it will survive is it will re-emerge in a new form under socialism, because the only way for the Christian faith to actually survive this sinful wreck that it's been twisted around is for imperialism to be destroyed, and for a new form of society, a workers' state, to be born, in which all religions can be freed from the cult of imperialism, and be free to develop in more natural ways, in ways that are attuned to the needs, or be they material or spiritual, of the majority of the proletariat. Rather a lengthy digression into Christianity and imperialism there, but I wanted to get that in there. All right, Kawabi, greetings to you in Denmark. Greetings to Grassy Knoll in Seattle, Washington. Greetings to Lee over on the wrong side of the Pennines. Greetings to my comrade Naylor. Good to have you with us. Greetings to Jonathan Foster and Arnold, who joins us from sunny Bridlington. Tim Gray is also with Ian Foster and Luca. And Svetlana says, for the first 7 months of 2024, Ukrainian military report 37,000 desertions versus 21,000 in 2023 and 9,000 in 2022. Moreover, military officials themselves say that the real figures are likely twice as high. So you're looking, what, 60 60, 70 to 80,000 possible desertions. Are those, Svetlana, are those successful desertions that you're referring to there, or attempted desertions? It'd be good if you could clarify that one. Good day to Steve Choate in Ringgold, Georgia. James Graham is here. Jerry says F-16s pick up every speck of dust off on takeoff, requiring careful sweeping of the runway. Yeah, I heard that. They're very sensitive to environmental pressures. Greetings to More Time Needed out there in Skeggy. I should really visit again one day. I haven't been there for many years. David King comments, them washing machines dangerous. Indeed they are. Harold is with us. Svetlana says, the number of men volunteering here for the Russian army has been strong since the start of the SMO. But since the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk Oblast, the number of volunteers has skyrocketed. Yeah, there's never been a problem with the Russians filling their ranks. In fact, this Kursk thing seems to have done them a favor in terms of further bolstering the number of recruits. Irish Partisan joins us from Mogilev, Eastern Belarus, enjoying the show, drinking a beer on a fine summer's evening. Well, have one for me, Irish Partisan. Good to have you with us. Ruski Partisan says, I read an article on Russian Telegram channel. This war has great similarities with 41 to 45, where the Nazis emphasized moral, willpower, technology, GDP, bad Russian morale. The alliance of fascist countries was the same then as now. You just have to kick the door in and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. So said Hitler. Yes, that's... Yeah. Well, our problem for Adolf's problem there was that he'd been reading apparently too much Trotsky. I've heard this from a couple of sources now. Grover Fur mentions it. I've seen some Russian sources mention it as well, that apparently Hitler started reading Trotsky's articles in the late 1930s. And that might have been part of what convinced him that the war in the Soviet Union was going to be a great success. Because Trotsky had been loudly asserting over and over again that the Stalin regime, as he put it, was on the point of collapse. So Adolf might have been taken in by another one taken in by Trotsky's con artistry there. Let's scroll down. Alex Oliveira says, the crazy thing is that the Russians are still not using full force in this conflict, and that's correct, they're not. Jawed, greetings to you, comrade, who I take it you're in Islamabad because you say it's looking beautiful during the monsoon season. Good to have you with us. Neander Wallace says, how this war ends and the perception of its importance is important for how Eastern Europeans view Russia and the US. I think you're right, which is part of the reason why the Baltic states, or the rulers of the Baltic states and Poland in particular, are getting more and more frantic. Because if this ends in the way that I think it will, which is a disastrous defeat and the conquest of most of Ukraine by the Russians, then those who are going to be left with the largest amount of eggs spread over the largest amount of facial area are going to be, well, the Poles, who have sunk an awful lot into this war in terms of material, and if you believe the reports from both Russian and Ukrainian sources in terms of men as well. You read various different estimates as to the amount of Poles that have been operating in Ukraine, and it could be 10,000 or maybe even higher than that, but certainly 10,000 is the number of Polish forces that have been reported to be operating out of uniform inside Ukraine. And of course this is the old, what some refer to as the sheep dip method, meaning that they just get dipped in a different identity and sent over there. So they call them mercenaries, but it's likely these are recent departures from the Polish army. And again, these are Russian reports have said that the Poles are used sometimes as frontline soldiers, sometimes as special forces, but more often than not, they and the Americans and the British that are over there are used as blocking units, meaning they do the dirty business that the bourgeois historians, the pro-imperialist historians like Anthony Beaver, always accused the NKVD of having done, which is blocking retreats by frontline forces and shooting deserters, or accusing people of desertion and shooting them. That was always the allegation that the anti-communists made about the NKVD, whereas in reality the NKVD rounded up attempted deserters and sent them back to the battlefield. In the case of the Poles and the Americans and the Brits, apparently, they are essentially used as disciplinary units, roving around the battlefield, blocking off any attempted retreat, and often shooting Ukrainians who do try to retreat. In fact, there's been footage that came out a couple of weeks ago which showed clearly that this was going on. Like, again, it was shot from the air, but it appeared to show executions happening in Ukrainian trenches. And there's been a number of reports that go back a couple of years now that this has been one of the primary usages of the Polish forces. So if this whole thing comes crashing down, the Polish political class in general, both the Andrzej Duda side of it and the Donald Tusk side of it, are all going to be implicated in a disaster. So it will affect how Eastern Europeans as a whole view the US as well. And I think there's a certain point of view within petty bourgeois and bourgeois circles in the east of Europe that the US is the great almighty and invincible machine that can't be challenged. If the Russians seem to have fought it and won in Ukraine, then again the perception is going to change in the east, and maybe you'll see some trouble even in the Baltic states, where the ruling class there have been doing their absolute best to run the whole state and society into the ground. It would make much more sense for the Baltic states to have some kind of much improved relationship with both Belarus and Russia. It would make much more sense for them to do that than stay in the NATO and EU bloc. It makes no sense for them to be there. It makes no sense for anybody to be in the EU and NATO bloc anymore, in actual fact. But if we're talking about the prosperity and safety of the Baltic states, then they would do much better to strike a deal with the Russians rather than make themselves into the belligerent outliers of the US imperial system. Right. YepX says, or asks rather, did you hear that China said the US bullying of the world is over? I told my liberal family this, but they consumed Western media and told me China wants to nuke us. Liberals are exhausting. Liberals are a strange bunch. But yes, I mean, the era, I wouldn't say it's over yet. The US has still got many moves that it can make and many instruments of death that it can wield. But what the Chinese are right is that the era of the US being able to blow up anybody, well, that never really existed. But to act in an apparently unchallenged fashion towards countries like Syria and Libya and Iraq, that era ended 10 years ago. It ended as soon as the Russians sent their men into Syria, basically to counteract the US, but under the disguise of an anti-terrorist operation. They were fighting pro-US forces in Syria, in the form of the jihadists. It ended with the Russian incursion into Syria, and it really ended with the special military operation. So the Chinese understand that very well, which is why they're going to give Sullivan the big fuck off, basically. Ruski Partisan says, a prize should be awarded in the group telegram to the person who guesses when Zelensky is fleeing Kiev. I think there are moles who switch sides the same day, work for Russia. Well, let's see. If somebody guesses the date that Zelensky will flee, I'm trying to work out an appropriate prize. Let me think. I will come up with an appropriate prize and I will offer it on the Telegram channel as you suggest. And we'll see who gets the date right. Harold makes the correct observation that and says that the US and the British have been running a terrorist campaign in areas of the former USSR and Russia since before any of us were born. Yeah. I mean, you could argue that the British have been running a non-stop terrorist campaign in the Soviet Union and then Russia since 1917. In fact, that's a pretty safe bet to make. Svetlana says a massive scandal broke out in Ukraine today when the Rada deputy claimed that the F-16 that crashed was actually shot down by friendly fire from a Patriot air defense system. The claim is fairly widespread. Yeah, I've seen it on all the Ukrainian leak channels putting it out there. Harold says, as the old Russian saying goes, and I'm going to try and read this Cyrillic and not mangle it. Hang on. Anglishanka Gadet. I've probably made a complete mess of that. But let me know if I've managed to make any sense out of it whatsoever, Russian speakers, please. Greetings to a Macedonian living in Prague, also going under the name of Svetlana Simonoska. Good to have you with us. Philip Hall says, John Helmer at Dances with Bears has an interesting insight into the oligarch opposition to Putin. Interesting. Interesting comment there from Philip. I haven't checked John Helmer's website for a couple of weeks, actually, so I'll need to go on there to have a look at it. But I did try and get an interview with Helmer, but he never responded. Bible Belt in USA is more Zionist than Israel, says David King, and that is correct. Who is on the side of the Russian Federation state? The oligarchs are all against him, though they hide their opposition. Well, Philip makes a good point. The bourgeoisie in Russia, I mean, there is apparently like such a thing as a national bourgeois in Russia, but it seems that it's the lower end bourgeois, from my examination of this. The higher end bourgeois are, as you say, Philip, opposed to the war. They're opposed to the way that the Russian state is going, but they can't come out and openly say it because that would be disastrous for them. Now, the KPRF, Communist Party of the Russian Federation, are entirely correct upon this point, which is that now would be the time to wrap up the oligarchs. I mean, these people are incapable of doing anything other than like being comprador scum. So why allow them to continue to go around being these sort of parasitic bastards who are enemies of the Russian Federation, who are traitors, essentially? Why still allow them to waltz around is an interesting question. I'll have to read Helmer's analysis as to what's going on there. Yepek says, I would love to see a full live stream critiquing religion, specifically Christianity, from a Marxist-Leninist lens. I will add it to the list, comrade. Almir, hello to you, who says, Western Christian institutions are investment funds. Yes. Svetlana answers my earlier question, says these numbers are successful desertions plus AWOL. That's a hell of a big number. If that's like, we're looking like 70,000 to 80,000 successful desertions just in this year alone, then that's a gigantic number who have run away. And good luck to them, I say. Those men have made the right decision. Alan, greetings to you out there in Oakland, California. Please comment on the implications of a potential coup in Venezuela in light of what has happened in Ukraine. Well, I mean, I think I'll have to handle Venezuela in a separate stream, Alan. But just briefly, I don't think there's going to be. I know it has been a coup attempt in Venezuela. There was always going to be after the election, and so far it looks like the PSUV and Maduro have handled it quite well. what I won't say disappointed because I didn't expect much of either of these two characters anyway, but the line taken by Gustavo Petro and Lula of Colombia and Brazil, respectively, is contemptible. I mean, Lula, I've always, not always, but like for the last decade, I've been very suspicious of him ever since I learnt about the true role that the Brazilian government under Lula played in Haiti 20 years ago, providing so-called peacekeepers, in reality, part of an imperialist occupation force. So I'm very suspicious of the role that Lula plays. He seems to be trying to bargain with US imperialism constantly. So he comes out and takes a strong anti-Israel position, but then when it over something that is really does matter directly in his neighborhood, which is the fate of the truest anti-imperialist government in the Southern Americas, in the form of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution. Lula essentially shits on it every opportunity that he gets. Petro too, and I know the reason why they're doing it is because these guys are constantly playing games with the with US imperialism, hoping to buy themselves something. But of course, US imperialism will do what it always does with social democrats, or indeed anybody who is useful to them in the immediate period. They will use them up and chew them up and spit them out. So if they can use Lula to disadvantage the Venezuelans somehow, they will do. But if they find somebody who's a bit more reliable in Brazil than old Bolsonaro, then again it'll be goodbye Lula. Again, like the inadequacy of Lula's politics just gets shown over and over again. I don't think there will be a successful coup in Venezuela. I think that the strength of the Venezuelan revolution is in the relationship which the PSUV still has with the masses. The masses understand that they are under siege and understand their role in keeping the system afloat and keeping the revolutionary process going, which is why this counter-revolution so far has not worked. Now, they will probably try again when, if Trump wins, we can expect a hell of a lot, even more of aggressive actions taken against Venezuela than under Biden, which would really be going some. But we will see what happens there. I'll tell you what. I will come back to your question about the Venezuela and the potential coups there and its relationship to Ukraine, because I think there's more to discuss than I have time to do tonight, Alan. So come back probably tomorrow and we'll make more. We'll go over that again. Pablo Popova joins us from Poland. Says, greetings from Poland, comrades. Yes, we are lost and there is no hope for normal people. I know how that feels, because it feels that way in the imperial core as well. Like Poland is an outlier in the American imperial system. Britain is its own imperialist power in its own right, the oldest imperialist power, the most perfidious imperialist power in many respects. And so, yes, it's like you feel like when you're looking at this that there's no hope for any kind of change. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that every time revolutionaries have despaired and thought that there's never going to be anything will happen here, that the reactionaries are too strong, that the anti-communism and the anti-socialism of the population is too great to overcome, something will happen to knock this whole thing over. The ruling class, no matter how much propaganda they've put out there, no matter how much anti-communism they have built up, no matter how much they think they've convinced people to turn against their own interests, their own class interests, then it still doesn't work for them. The dominance of class as the central contradiction will emerge again. And the Polish reactionaries will be caught out and left looking rather foolish and helpless when it does. The European economy, or European economies, I should say, stand on the knife edge of recession. Life is only going to get worse for people east and west. And so I would put it this way. Yes, all of us feel now like it is a constant uphill struggle to get anywhere, to even move the rock uphill slightly. But things will change. Earthquakes will occur, and it will occur when the working class does move into action. And it will. It inevitably will. It's just a question of us as communists being prepared as far as we possibly can for when it does. Almir says, NKVD killed 700 trillion Red Army soldiers and Stalin ate babies. I learnt that from Anthony Beaver. That's Sir Anthony Beaver, if you don't mind. He earned that title with all the lies that he's told. Frank says, please, if time permits, a program about China and its socialism. Being worked on, not as we speak, but being worked on currently, Frank. So check back in a few weeks for more on that. Pablo comments that society in Poland is extremely brainwashed. I know. It is over here as well. I mean, I've met emigre Poles who come to Britain generally tend to be like people who have a scary vision of what the West is, and that it's completely divorced from reality. They get disabused of their delusions pretty quickly, though. Walter Ulbricht, the same, says, from beginning to end, it seems that the Western powers have totally underestimated Russia, militarily, economically, politically, and culturally. Yes, they have, consistently, and we've covered this extensively here on the channel. The prize should be a Ushanka, says Alex Oliveira. Maybe it will. Comrade Naylor comes in here with a guess. Zelensky will flee on October the 7th, when a lot of us will be busy celebrating this revolutionary date. My guess. That might be interesting. That Zelensky might just do that, you know. If there's a big series of demonstrations on October the 7th this year, and Zelensky decides, you know what, fuck it, while everybody's distracted, I'm off. Just depends whether the Americans will open up that villa in Florida for him. Neander Wallace says, Zelensky will leave before the next POTUS comes in. Naylor, if you're right, then I will get you, I will send you an Ushanka in the post. Or I might just bring it down to you. We'll see. Greetings to Sid, who says, I always begin reading something and then forget streams I plan to watch. Well, a book is always superior, I must say, even as somebody who does streaming for a lot. Jenny, hello to you. Baba Wong says, hello from Switzerland, but originally from North London. Svetlana says that I pronounced that Russian phrase basically okay. Well, I was doing Russian alphabet learning earlier on, so I'm glad it paid off. What it means is the English woman takes a dump, a phrase popular in Russia since Catherine the Great, meaning the English are always shitting on Russia. Well, this time their attempt at taking a shit on Russia literally blew back on them. Legal Advising says, I support the special military operation because the Russian Communist Party supports it and not because of Putin. For me, Putin is not a communist. Well, he's not. I've long insisted that Putin is, if anything, he's the truest face. He's the most consistent face of Russian liberalism. That's really, to me, what he represents. And he is essentially a liberal pragmatist, prepared to lean one way than the other, though these days being pushed more and more in the left direction. Sid Hatfield says, a lot of churches, especially here in the United States, are just money-washing funds. Yeah, I've just started looking into this. I mean, the amount of money that gets washed through churches, and the amount of money that the various churches get from different facets of the U.S. state machine to do various bits of work, both inside the United States and as missionaries outside of it, is really quite astonishing. Missionary work didn't stop at the end of the 19th century, as it turns out. When will you have an interview with Grover Furr? Excellent question, Edward. I'll put that in to my to-do list. Alex Oliveira says, I don't like Lula's comments about Venezuela either. Lula is the only strong left figure in Brazil. You may well be right. This is the problem facing Brazil and the left in Brazil. I will need to do more on. I'll need to do a stream on Brazil in the near future. Okay, I'm not. That's a longer sentence in Cyrillic, so I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that. uh, Sid Hatfield says the potential always remains and is strong until the Chavistas dispossess the Venezuelan bourgeois, evict them, and stop even trying to appease the US. Well, that's correct. I mean, the strength of any counter-revolution in Venezuela is directly linked to the fact that the Venezuelan bourgeois remain in place. To be truth be told, I think Sid is right, which is that the revolutionary process in Venezuela might as well scoop up these people and eject them now, because what good does having them there bring? And there are some who've made the arguments that there are certain minority bourgeois opinions that are in support of the Bolivarian revolution, but I've yet to see strong evidence of that. Glad my words meant something to you, Pablo. Always. What is the old phrase? Pessimism of the spirit, optimism of the will. The best attitude to have. If you Naylor says, if I win, you want the Stalin bust. All right, fuck it, deal, comrade. If you win, where is he? Hang on. Let's reach over here. All right, winner gets this. You know, there you go. There he is, Uncle Joe himself. So if you can guess the date that the clown. The cocaine clown of Kiev flees Kiev to the west, you get the Stalin bust. I will send this anywhere in the world, any corner of the world, you can get this. That is the prize. Thank you to Comrade Naylor for making the suggestion. So make your guesses. Make your guesses. If you're not a member of the Telegram channel as of yet, join up. Make your guess on there. When will the cocaine clown of Kiev, the Kiev cocaine clown posse, when will he or they flee Kiev? If you can guess the date, a bust of Stalin will be yours. I used to have, by the way, many years ago now, a very nice brass Lenin bust, but that was stolen. Well, not stolen, but had to be left in a place I abandoned a while ago. Yes. Luis Gomez says, and read Grover Fur, please. Well, already have done. Excellent work. Good if you can get Grover Fur on, as I've not found one video of his with decent audio. Well, certainly, I mean, adjusting somebody's audio when you interview them is actually quite easy. I mean, if it's being done live, then it's a bit of a problem. But I think for somebody like him, I would probably pre-record it and then put it out as an audio version, because there you can much more easily manipulate the audio to make it sound better. All right, so okay, going to be bringing things to a conclusion for this evening. I'll be back with you again tomorrow, where we'll be. I'm not quite sure. We're probably going to do a West Asia update. So looking at occupied Palestine, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Yemen, etc. So join me again for that tomorrow. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in tonight. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Announcements coming up as to Patreon content over the course of this weekend. Be sure to pay attention to those. But until tomorrow, thank you for listening, and I will leave you with an optimistic thought of revolution in troubled times. Prior to the February Revolution of 1917, it is said that even Lenin himself felt that there might not be a revolution in his lifetime. Then what happens? A bread riot started by women workers in Petrograd escalates into a full-blown uprising which sees the removal of the Tsar and the end of the Romanov dynasty. And even Lenin himself, with all his great knowledge and wisdom, didn't really see it coming. These things can surprise us when we least expect it. So always bear that in mind whenever you're feeling pessimistic, whenever you're feeling like you as a communist are not making any headway with anybody. You are always planting seeds, and seeds in the right environment will eventually grow into mighty oak trees. And with that thought, I will leave you for this evening.